Some wounds cut so deep they change the very shape of a man's soul. The August heat hung over Shadowbrook Country Club like a suffocating blanket, turning the pristine fairways into a green mirage shimmering with old money and older secrets. Marcus Wellington adjusted his instructor's cap and watched Bradford Tate line up his shot on the 18th tee, the man's voice still echoing with poison. Golf wasn't meant for blacks. Look at that Tiger character, thinks he owns the sport. What Bradford didn't know was that he'd just insulted the wrong man. Marcus wasn't just another golf instructor scraping by on lessons and tips. 15 years ago, he'd been Marcus Lightning Thompson, the most gifted young golfer anyone had ever seen, until one terrible night at this very club changed everything. Now, as other members nodded in silent agreement with Bradford's venom, Marcus felt the carefully built walls around his new identity beginning to crack. The accident that destroyed his career hadn't been an accident at all. Someone in this room knew exactly who he was. Someone had been waiting, watching, ensuring he'd never rise again. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd let him come back. What happens when a man discovers his greatest failure was someone else's greatest success? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus forced his breathing to steady as Bradford's driver cut through the humid air, sending the ball sailing toward the distant green. The satisfying crack of contact should have been routine, just another lesson wrapping up on another scorching afternoon. Instead, it felt like a gunshot marking the end of 15 years of careful anonymity. "Beautiful swing, Mr. Tate," Marcus heard himself say, the words tasting like ash. His voice carried the practiced deference he'd perfected over countless lessons with men just like Bradford, wealthy, entitled, and blissfully unaware that their golf instructor had once been destined for greatness far beyond their comprehension. Bradford straightened his shoulders, preening under the praise. Years of proper instruction, Wellington. Not like these newcomers trying to muscle their way into traditions they don't understand. He handed Marcus his driver with the casual dismissiveness of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. "Same time next week?" "Of course, sir." Marcus accepted the club, his calloused hands steady despite the storm raging beneath his skin. The weight felt familiar yet foreign, once an extension of his very soul, now just another tool of his disguise. As Bradford strode toward the clubhouse, his golf spikes clicking against the cart path, Marcus remained at the tee. The other club members who'd witnessed the exchange were dispersing, their uncomfortable silence speaking volumes. Not one had challenged Bradford's words. Not one had defended Tiger Woods, or by extension, any black golfer who dared dream of competing in their pristine white world. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he stood, invisible in plain sight, teaching the very people who would have cheered his downfall if they knew who he really was. Marcus Lightning Thompson, the boy wonder who dominated junior tournaments across Georgia, whose swing had been compared to poetry in motion, whose future had seemed limitless until that October night in 1982. He walked to the edge of the tee box, gazing down the fairway toward the clubhouse. The colonial architecture looked exactly the same as it had 15 years ago, all white columns and southern grandeur, a monument to exclusion dressed up as tradition. The sight triggered a flood of memories he'd spent years suppressing, the sound of his cleats on these same paths, the weight of expectations on his 17-year-old shoulders, the scholarship offers that had poured in from every major university in the country, and then the darkness, the pain, the months in the hospital, learning to walk again while his dreams withered like flowers in an August drought. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through the day's schedule. 3 more lessons, 2 equipment fittings, and a staff meeting about the upcoming charity tournament. The mundane rhythm of his current life, reliable, safe, and utterly hollow. He'd built this existence brick by brick, transforming Marcus Thompson into Marcus Wellington, trading his lightning-fast swing for a steady paycheck and the anonymity he'd thought he needed to survive. But Bradford's casual racism had torn something open inside him, exposed the raw wound that had never properly healed. The comment about Tiger wasn't just ignorant, it was personal. Tiger represented everything Marcus had been denied, the chance to compete at the highest level, to show the world that talent recognized no color barriers, to prove that a kid from the wrong side of Augusta could master a rich man's game. A shadow fell across the tee box. and Marcus looked up to find Janet Morrison approaching. The club's assistant manager moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to solving problems before they became scandals. "Everything all right out here, Marcus?" Her voice carried a note of concern that seemed genuine, though with Janet, professional discretion always came first. I couldn't help but notice Mr. Tate seemed agitated. Marcus managed a thin smile. "Just discussing technique. You know how passionate golfers can get about the game." Janet's dark eyes studied his face with uncomfortable intensity. She was one of the few staff members who'd been at Shadowbrook long enough to remember the old days, though she'd only been a teenager working summers in the pro shop back then. Sometimes Marcus caught her looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, recognition mixed with uncertainty, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Well, if you need anything," she said, letting the offer hang in the air before heading back toward the clubhouse. Marcus watched her go, then began collecting the scattered tees from the practice session. The simple task gave his hands something to do while his mind raced. How many other people might harbor suspicions about his true identity? How long before someone connected Marcus Wellington to the promising young golfer who'd vanished from the sports pages 15 years ago? As he walked toward his next lesson, Marcus felt the familiar weight of his secret pressing down on him. He'd convinced himself that anonymity was freedom, that obscurity was safety. But Bradford's words had awakened something he'd thought was dead. A hunger for justice, for truth, for the chance to reclaim what had been stolen from him. The question was whether he had the courage to risk everything he'd built for the chance to finally fight back. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he unlocked the door to his modest apartment, the confrontation with Bradford still echoing in his mind like a struck bell. The one-bedroom unit on Peach Street sat in stark contrast to the opulent world of Shadowbrook, cramped where the club was sprawling, weathered where it was pristine. But it was his, purchased with cash 15 years ago when he'd emerged from the hospital with a new name and a desperate need to disappear. The living room walls told the story of Marcus Wellington, golf instructor, framed certificates from the PGA Teaching Academy, photos of satisfied students, a modest collection of instructional books. Nothing that would connect him to Marcus Thompson, the phenom whose junior tournament trophies had once lined his childhood bedroom. Those remnants of his former life lay buried in a storage unit across town, along with newspaper clippings and scholarship letters he couldn't bear to destroy but dared not display. He dropped his keys on the kitchen counter, the metal clanging against the formica surface with finality. Through the window, he could see Mrs. Chen tending her tomato garden in the yard next door. She'd wave if she spotted him, perhaps offer another jar of her homemade preserves. It was the kind of simple human interaction that had anchored him during the darkest years of his recovery. No expectations, no questions about his past, just neighborly kindness. The refrigerator hummed as he pulled out a beer, the domestic routine automatic after years of practice. Dinner would be takeout from Chen's Garden, Mrs. Chen's daughter's restaurant, followed by tournament footage on the Golf Channel, the same pattern he'd followed for years, safe and predictable. But tonight, the thought of that familiar rhythm felt suffocating. His phone buzzed with a text from David Reynolds, his only real friend among Shadowbrook's staff. "Heard there was drama at the tee today. You okay?" Marcus stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. David was a good man, the club's head groundskeeper who'd started the same week Marcus had been hired. They'd bonded over their shared status as outsiders in the club's hierarchy. David because of his blue-collar background, Marcus because of carefully manufactured reasons that had nothing to do with the truth. Just the usual member tensions, he typed back. "Nothing I can't handle." But as he hit send, Marcus wondered if that was still true. For 15 years, he'd handled everything by staying invisible, by swallowing his pride and cashing his paychecks. The strategy had worked because he'd believed he had no choice. The accident had taken more than his career. It had taken his identity, his future, his sense of self-worth. Starting over as Marcus Wellington had seemed like survival, not surrender. Now, with Tiger Woods dominating headlines and Bradford's venom still burning in his ears, the walls of his carefully constructed life felt paper-thin. He moved to the bathroom, studying his reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. 15 years had added gray to his temples and lines around his eyes, but the hands that gripped the sink were still strong, still capable. Sometimes, late at night, he'd find himself practicing his old grip in the darkness, muscle memory intact despite the years of disuse. The scar along his left ribs, hidden beneath his polo shirt, served as a constant reminder of that October night. The official story, the one buried in police reports and hospital records, called it a single car accident. Young black golfer, probably drinking, lost control on a dark country road. Case closed, promising career ended. Everyone moved on. Everyone except Marcus, who remembered fragments of that night that didn't align with the official narrative. The sound of another engine, headlights that had followed him from the club, the impact that had felt deliberate, calculated. But who would believe a broken teenager over the respected members of Augusta's most exclusive country club? His phone rang, the landline he maintained for official business. The caller ID showed Shadowbrook's main number. "Marcus, it's Janet." Her voice carried a tension that hadn't been there during their earlier encounter. "I need you to come in early tomorrow. Mr. Whitfield wants to see you." Charles Whitfield, the club president. A man Marcus had met exactly twice in 5 years, both times during mandatory staff meetings, the kind of old-money patriarch who treated the help like furniture until they gave him reason to do otherwise. "Any idea what it's about?" Marcus asked, though dread was already settling in his stomach. "The Bradford situation. Apparently, some members are concerned about the atmosphere during lessons." Janet's diplomatic phrasing couldn't mask the underlying message. Someone had complained, and Marcus was being called to account. After hanging up, he stood in his kitchen as evening shadows lengthened across the linoleum floor. Tomorrow would bring consequences he'd spent 15 years trying to avoid. The question was whether facing them would finally free him from the prison he'd built, or simply confirm that some cages could never be unlocked from the inside. The morning arrived gray and oppressive, thunderclouds gathering on the horizon like an omen. Marcus had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and rehearsing explanations he knew would sound hollow in Charles Whitfield's oak-paneled office. By 6 a.m., he'd given up on rest entirely, brewing coffee with hands that refused to stay steady. He arrived at Shadowbrook 30 minutes early, hoping to gather himself before the inevitable confrontation. The parking lot was nearly empty, just the groundskeeping trucks and Janet's silver sedan. The morning mist clung to the fairways like smoke, and in the distance, automatic sprinklers whispered across the greens with mechanical precision. "Marcus!" Janet's voice made him turn as he approached the staff entrance. She stood by her car, cigarette in hand, a habit he'd never seen her indulge during business hours. "We need to talk before you go upstairs." Something in her tone made his chest tighten. "What's happened?" She took a long drag, exhaling slowly. "Bradford Tate called Mr. Whitfield at home last night, claims you were insubordinate and threatening during yesterday's lesson." Her fingers made air quotes around the words, disgust evident in her voice. "Says he doesn't feel safe having you as an instructor." The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow. 15 years of perfect behavior, of swallowing every insult and biting back every response. And now Bradford was rewriting history to make himself the victim. "Janet, you know that's not—" "I know exactly what kind of man Bradford Tate is," she interrupted, dropping her cigarette and crushing it under her heel. "But Marcus, there's something else, something I should have told you years ago." The morning air suddenly felt thinner. "What are you talking about?" Janet glanced around the empty parking lot, then motioned for him to follow her toward a cluster of oak trees near the maintenance building. Once they were out of sight of the clubhouse windows, she turned to face him with an expression he'd never seen before, vulnerability mixed with determination. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "I've known since the day you walked in here looking for work. Marcus Thompson. Lightning Thompson. The kid who was supposed to change everything." The world tilted. Marcus felt his carefully constructed identity cracking like ice under pressure. "I don't know what you're—" "The scar on your left side. You wince sometimes when you demonstrate a full swing. And your natural grip. I've watched you correct it to the textbook version you teach, but when you think no one's looking, you hold the club exactly like you did at 17. Janet's voice carried 15 years of suppressed knowledge. "I was Janet Morrison back then, too, working summers in the pro shop. I watched every one of your practice rounds that summer before Before the accident, Marcus leaned against the oak tree, the bark rough against his back. The secret he'd guarded so fiercely had been an open book to someone who'd spent years quietly protecting it. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because I figured if Marcus Thompson wanted to be Marcus Wellington, he had his reasons." Janet's eyes held a sadness that spoke to deeper understanding. "But things are different now. Bradford's not just complaining about yesterday. He's asking questions about your background, your references, why there's so little documentation of your career before Shadowbrook." The implications crashed over Marcus like a cold wave. If Bradford started digging, how long before someone connected the dots? How long before his carefully buried past came roaring back to destroy not just his job, but potentially his freedom? "There's more," Janet continued, her voice dropping even lower. "I've been hearing rumors. Whispers about the night you disappeared. Some people think your accident wasn't an accident at all." The words Marcus had spent 15 years not allowing himself to think hung in the morning air between them. The fragments of memory he'd dismissed as trauma-induced confusion suddenly felt solid, real, dangerous. Who's been talking? David Reynolds, for one. His father used to work security at the club back then, and there are others, maintenance staff, former employees, people who remember things that didn't add up. Janet checked her watch, anxiety creeping into her voice. "Look, Whitfield's expecting you in 20 minutes. You can go in there, take whatever punishment he hands out, and hope this blows over. Keep being Marcus Wellington." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "Or you can decide you've been silent long enough, that some things are worth fighting for, even if it means risking everything." As if summoned by her words, the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the pristine grounds of Shadowbrook Country Club. Marcus stood at the crossroads of two paths, the safe anonymity he'd known for 15 years, or the terrifying possibility of reclaiming his truth. The choice would define not just his future, but finally determine whether Marcus Thompson had truly died that October night, or simply been waiting for the right moment to rise again. Marcus stared at Janet, her words echoing in his mind like a death knell. The morning air felt suddenly thin, each breath a conscious effort as the weight of 15 years of careful deception pressed down on him. The oak tree's rough bark against his back seemed to anchor him to reality, even as that reality shifted beneath his feet like quicksand. "You don't understand what you're asking me to do," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The sun had climbed higher, but the shadows seemed to deepen around them, as if the very grounds of Shadowbrook were closing in. "I've spent 15 years building this life, brick by brick. Marcus Wellington has a clean record, references, a future. Marcus Thompson," he swallowed hard, "Marcus Thompson is a ghost story that ends badly." Janet's expression softened, but her resolve remained firm. "Is that what you call this? Living?" She gestured toward the clubhouse, its white columns gleaming in the morning light like the bars of an expensive prison. "Teaching spoiled rich kids how to hold a club, while their parents make jokes about people who look like you? Watching Bradford Tate spew his poison while you bite your tongue and say, 'Yes, sir'?" The truth of her words cut deep, but the alternative terrified him more. Marcus had seen what happened to black men who challenged the established order in Augusta, especially when that challenge threatened powerful people. The smart ones kept their heads down and survived. The bold ones ended up like Marcus Thompson, he realized with a chill, broken and forgotten. "You think I haven't wanted to fight back?" The words escaped before he could stop them, 15 years of suppressed rage bleeding through his careful control. "You think there hasn't been a single day when I didn't want to grab Bradford by his perfectly pressed collar and tell him exactly who he's been looking down on? But I know how this story ends, Janet. I've already lived through the first act." His hands were shaking now, the tremor he'd fought to control since yesterday's confrontation returning with a vengeance. The scar along his ribs began to ache, phantom pain from injuries that had healed in body but never in spirit. What if they come after me again? What if whoever ran me off that road 15 years ago is still here, still watching, still waiting? The questions he'd buried beneath years of mundane routine came pouring out. I had everything once, talent, future, hope. They took it all in one night. What makes you think they won't finish the job if I give them another chance? Janet stepped closer, her voice urgent. Because you're not 17 anymore, Marcus. You're not alone. Tiger Woods proved something just by existing on that course at Augusta National, that the old walls can be broken down, but only if people are willing to push. And look what Tiger had to endure to get there, Marcus countered, desperation creeping into his voice. The death threats, the racist taunts, the constant scrutiny. He had sponsors, security, the whole golf establishment protecting their investment. What do I have? A fake identity and a teaching job that pays barely enough to cover rent. The sound of car doors slamming in the parking lot made them both turn. Early arrivals, club members coming for breakfast or morning rounds. The normal rhythm of Shadowbrook was beginning, and soon the protective cocoon of pre-dawn quiet would shatter into the day's dangerous exposure. Whitfield's waiting, Janet said, checking her watch again. The gesture seemed to underscore the ticking clock of Marcus's decision. You've got maybe 15 minutes before he starts making calls to find out why you're late. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to summon the courage that had once driven him to attack impossible pin placements and attempt shots that wiser golfers would never consider. But that boy's fearlessness had been beaten out of him on a dark country road, replaced by the bitter wisdom of survival at any cost. What if I can't be him anymore? The admission felt like tearing open an old wound. What if Marcus Thompson was just a kid's dream, and all that's left is what I've become? What if I'm too afraid, too damaged, too— He struggled for the word. Too broken? Then Bradford, and whoever hurt you all those years ago, win, Janet said simply. And the next time some ignorant bastard decides to put a black golfer in their place, there's one less person willing to stand up and say, enough. The weight of that responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders like a lead blanket. He'd convinced himself that staying hidden was just self-preservation, but Janet's words forced him to confront an uglier truth, that his silence made him complicit in his own oppression, and by extension, everyone who came after him. But knowing what was right, and having the strength to do it, were entirely different things. As he stood in the shadow of the oak tree, Marcus felt the full measure of his fear, not just of physical harm, but of hope itself, the devastating possibility that if he tried to reclaim his identity and failed, he might finally break beyond repair. Marcus drew a shuddering breath, the morning air burning his lungs like fire. The oak tree's shadow seemed to pulse around him, expanding and contracting with each heartbeat as 15 years of careful survival warred against a lifetime of buried dreams. In the distance, sprinklers continued their mechanical whispers across the 18th green, the same green where Marcus Thompson had once sunk a 40-foot putt to win the Georgia Junior Championship. I need 10 minutes, he said finally, his voice hoarse with the weight of impending decision. Janet nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. I'll call Whitfield's office, tell him you're reviewing yesterday's incident report. She paused, her hand briefly touching his shoulder. Whatever you decide, Marcus, both versions of you. You're not as alone as you think. She walked back toward the clubhouse, leaving him standing beneath the ancient oak. Marcus pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in 3 years, Dr. Sarah Chen, a trauma counselor who'd helped him through the darkest period of his recovery. She'd been the only person who knew fragments of his real story, the only one who'd understood why Marcus Thompson had to disappear. The phone rang twice before her familiar voice answered. Marcus, is everything okay? I need to tell you something, he said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice, about who I really am, about what really happened that night. For the next 8 minutes, standing in the shadow of Shadowbrook's oldest tree, Marcus spoke truths he'd never said aloud. He told Dr. Chen about the racist comments, about Janet's revelation, about the choice now grinding him between its teeth like a trap. Most importantly, he told her about the fear, not just of physical retaliation, but of hope itself. Marcus, she said when he finished, do you remember what you told me during our last session? About the difference between surviving and living? He closed his eyes, the memory surfacing like debris from a wreck. I said I was tired of just surviving, but I didn't know how to start living again. And what did I tell you? That living requires risk. That healing happens when we stop protecting our wounds and start using our scars. The words felt different now, weighted with immediate consequence rather than theoretical comfort. The boy who attempted those impossible shots, he's still in there, Marcus. Older, wiser, scarred, but not broken. The question is whether you're ready to let him breathe. After hanging up, Marcus stood motionless for another minute, feeling something shift deep in his chest. It wasn't courage exactly. Courage implied the absence of fear, and terror still coursed through his veins like ice water. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, something that felt like lightning. He began walking toward the clubhouse, each step carrying him further from the safety of Marcus Wellington and closer to a truth that could destroy everything. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the protective mist, and members were arriving in greater numbers. Bradford's silver Mercedes wasn't among them yet, but Marcus knew it would be soon. Inside the staff entrance, he paused at the bulletin board where employee notices hung in neat rows. His own hiring announcement from 5 years ago stared back at him. Marcus Wellington, certified PGA instructor, excellent references, excited to join the Shadowbrook family. The lies felt like acid in his throat. Janet appeared beside him, coffee in hand, and worry etched across her face. Whitfield's getting impatient. I know. Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, laminated newspaper clipping he'd carried for 15 years, but never looked at. The photo showed a 17-year-old black golfer mid-swing, the caption reading, "Lightning Thompson strikes again at Augusta Junior Classic." The boy in the picture radiated confidence and joy, emotions Marcus had almost forgotten he was capable of feeling. "Janet," he said, his voice gaining strength with each word, "when I walk into Whitfield's office, I want you to make some phone calls. Contact the Augusta Chronicle, ask for their sports archives. Tell them someone wants to discuss the Marcus Thompson case from 1982, the car accident that ended his career." Her eyes widened with understanding, and something that might have been pride. "And call David Reynolds. Tell him if his father really knows something about that night, now might be the time to talk." Marcus folded the newspaper clipping and slipped it into his shirt pocket, directly over his heart. The scar along his ribs throbbed once, sharply, then settled into something that felt less like pain and more like remembrance. The elevator to Whitfield's office waited at the end of the hallway, its polished doors reflecting a man caught between two identities. But as Marcus walked toward it, each step felt less like approaching execution and more like coming home. He was still terrified, still uncertain, still damaged by 15 years of careful hiding. But for the first time since that October night, Marcus Thompson was ready to swing for the pin. The elevator climbed with mechanical precision, each floor marking Marcus's ascent from the safety of anonymity toward an uncertain reckoning. His reflection in the polished steel doors showed a man caught between worlds, Marcus Wellington's careful posture warring with Lightning Thompson's natural confidence. The newspaper clipping over his heart felt like it was burning through his shirt. The doors opened to reveal Whitfield's secretary, Mrs. Harrison, whose disapproving frown suggested she'd already heard Bradford's version of yesterday's events. "Mr. Wellington, you're late. Mr. Whitfield has been waiting." "I know," Marcus said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. "Tell him I'm ready now." But as he approached Whitfield's office, raised voices from within made him pause. Through the heavy oak door he could hear Bradford Tate's familiar drawl, sharp with indignation. "Absolutely unacceptable behavior, Charles. The man was completely out of line, and frankly, I question whether he has the temperament for this position. My grandfather helped found this club, and I won't be disrespected by hired help." Whitfield's response was measured but firm. "Bradford, I've known Marcus for 5 years. He's never had so much as a complaint filed against him. Are you certain this incident wasn't perhaps a misunderstanding?" Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Charles Whitfield was a businessman first, and Marcus's teaching record was spotless. Maybe misunderstanding? Bradford's voice rose dangerously. "He practically threatened me, Charles. And there's something else, something off about the man. I've had my people look into his background, and there are gaps, significant ones." The hope died in Marcus's chest, replaced by ice-cold terror. His carefully constructed identity was unraveling in real time, and he was standing helplessly outside the door while his fate was decided. What kind of gaps? Whitfield's tone had shifted, professional concern creeping in. His employment history before Shadowbrook is suspiciously thin, references that check out but feel rehearsed. And his teaching style, it's not textbook. It's intuitive, instinctive, like someone who learned the game from the inside out, not from instruction manuals. Marcus's hands clenched involuntarily. Bradford had noticed things that no one else had in 15 years, peeling back layers of deception with the persistence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "I'm not saying he's a criminal," Bradford continued, his voice taking on a tone of reasonable concern that made Marcus's skin crawl. "But in today's climate, with all the security concerns, don't you think we should know exactly who we're employing, especially someone with such unrestricted access to our members' families?" The implication hung in the air like poison. Marcus felt 15 years of careful progress collapsing around him, the old familiar weight of being presumed guilty until proven innocent settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. But then something unexpected happened. Through the door, Marcus heard footsteps, and Whitfield's voice carried a new edge. "Bradford, I appreciate your concerns, but I won't have employees investigated like common criminals based on vague suspicions. Marcus has earned my trust through 5 years of exemplary service." The footsteps approached the door, and Marcus barely had time to step back before it opened. Whitfield emerged, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of irritation. He stopped short when he saw Marcus, embarrassment flickering across his face. "Marcus, how long have you been—" "Long enough." Marcus straightened, feeling Lightning Thompson's posture assert itself for the first time in years. "Mr. Whitfield, I think it's time we had an honest conversation." Bradford appeared behind Whitfield, his face flushed with anger. When he saw Marcus, something ugly flashed in his eyes. "Speaking of honesty, why don't you tell Charles who you really are? Because I'm starting to think Marcus Wellington is just another lie." The moment stretched taut as a piano wire. Marcus felt the weight of every choice that had led him to this instant, the decision to disappear, to rebuild, to survive at any cost. But standing here now, facing his tormentor while a good man like Whitfield looked on in confusion, Marcus realized that survival wasn't enough anymore. "You're right, Bradford," Marcus said, his voice carrying an authority that made both men take notice. "Marcus Wellington is a lie, but not the kind you think." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the laminated newspaper clipping, its edges worn smooth from 15 years of careful preservation. With steady hands, he held it out for both men to see. "My name is Marcus Thompson. Most people called me Lightning. And 15 years ago, I was supposed to be the future of professional golf, until someone decided that future was too dangerous to allow." The photograph spoke louder than words. A 17-year-old black golfer frozen mid-swing, power and joy radiating from every line of his body. Whitfield's eyes widened with recognition, but Bradford's face went pale as understanding dawned. "Now," Marcus continued, feeling strength flow back into his voice like water returning to a dry riverbed, "shall we discuss what really happened that October night in 1982? The silence that followed Marcus's revelation stretched like a fault line about to split open the earth. Bradford's face cycled through emotions, shock, recognition, and finally something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. Whitfield stared at the newspaper clipping as if it were written in a foreign language he was desperately trying to translate. "Lightning Thompson," Whitfield whispered, the name escaping him like a prayer. "Jesus Christ, Marcus. I remember watching you play. You were extraordinary." Bradford recovered first, his shock crystallizing into something harder and more dangerous. "Well, well, the mysterious Marcus Wellington has quite the origin story." His voice carried the smooth venom Marcus remembered from their first confrontation, though I seem to recall Lightning Thompson's career ending rather abruptly. "Something about a car accident, wasn't it?" The way Bradford said car accident made Marcus's blood freeze. Not surprise, not curiosity, recognition, as if he knew details that had never made it into the newspapers. "You know," Bradford continued, stepping closer with predatory confidence, "my family has deep roots in Augusta golf circles. My grandfather used to tell fascinating stories about the old days when the game was purer, more exclusive. He particularly enjoyed recounting how certain threats to tradition were handled. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. This wasn't just racist hatred. This was something far more calculated and infinitely more terrifying. "What are you saying, Bradford?" "I'm saying that Shadowbrook has a long memory, Lightning." Bradford's use of his old nickname felt like a slap. "And some legacies are worth protecting, no matter how long it takes." Whitfield looked between them, confusion and growing alarm warring across his features. "Bradford, what the hell are you talking about? Marcus, what car accident?" Before Marcus could respond, Bradford pulled out his phone. "You know what? This conversation would benefit from additional perspective. I think I'll call my grandfather. He's 93 now, but his memory of certain historical events remains remarkably sharp." The casual malice in Bradford's voice triggered something primal in Marcus's nervous system. His scar began to throb in rhythm with his racing heartbeat, phantom pain from broken ribs and shattered dreams flooding back with devastating clarity. This wasn't just about revealing his identity anymore. He was walking into a trap that had been waiting 15 years to spring. "Charles," Marcus said urgently, turning to Whitfield, "I need to explain something, and I need you to listen carefully. In 1982, I was the top-ranked junior golfer in Georgia. I had scholarship offers from every major program, and I was being scouted by professional management companies. I was also black, 17, and naive enough to believe that talent would be enough." Whitfield nodded slowly, his businessman's instincts clearly sensing the gravity beneath Marcus's words. 3 days before I was supposed to sign with Augusta State, someone ran me off Highway 78 at midnight. I spent 6 months in the hospital. When I got out, the scholarships were gone, the scouts had moved on, and Lightning Thompson was effectively erased from golf history. "And you've spent 15 years hiding from whoever did it," Whitfield said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Not hiding," Marcus corrected, surprised by the steel in his own voice. "Preparing." Bradford's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Preparing for what? You're a nobody now, Lightning. A washed-up former prospect teaching rich kids how to hold a golf club. Whatever grand revenge fantasy you've been nurturing, I can assure you that the forces you're dealing with are far beyond your capacity to challenge." But as Bradford spoke, Marcus felt something shifting inside him. Not fear this time, but a cold, crystalline clarity he hadn't experienced since his junior tournament days. The same mental state that had allowed him to sink impossible putts under crushing pressure was asserting itself, filtering out emotion and focusing on strategy. "You're right about one thing, Bradford," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow carried more menace than shouting. "I am dealing with forces beyond my capacity to challenge, alone." He pulled out his phone and showed them Janet's latest text, Chronicle sports editor on line 2, Reynolds' family lawyer en route. "Augusta PD detective wants to discuss cold case, but you see, I'm not alone anymore. And unlike 17-year-old Lightning Thompson, I'm no longer naive enough to face this unprepared." Bradford's confident smirk faltered slightly, uncertainty flickering in his eyes for the first time. Marcus stepped closer, feeling decades of suppressed power flowing back into his frame. "So here's what's going to happen. We're going to walk downstairs to the conference room, and we're going to wait for some very interested parties to arrive. Then we're all going to discuss what really happened that October night. Every detail, every participant, every cover-up." He paused, letting his words sink in. Because Lightning Thompson is done hiding, and Marcus Wellington was never real anyway. What you're facing now is something you never planned for. Both of them, together, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The descent to the conference room felt like walking into the eye of a hurricane. Marcus led the way, his stride steady despite the earthquake of adrenaline threatening to buckle his knees. Behind him, Bradford's breathing came sharp and quick, while Whitfield's expensive shoes clicked against marble with funeral precision. The conference room sat at the heart of Shadowbrook's administrative wing, a windowless chamber lined with portraits of past club presidents, their painted eyes following the trio as they entered. The mahogany table gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this room had witnessed other confrontations, other secrets buried beneath layers of privilege and silence. "Sit down, Bradford," Marcus said, his voice carrying an authority that surprised even him. "We're going to wait." "I don't think you understand your position here," Bradford replied, but his usual swagger had developed a tremor. "You're an employee making accusations against a founding family. This ends one way, with your immediate termination and possible criminal charges." "Criminal charges?" Marcus turned slowly, feeling Lightning Thompson's predatory smile spread across his face. "That's interesting. What crime exactly am I committing by telling the truth about attempted murder?" The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Whitfield sank into a chair, his face pale as understanding dawned. Bradford's mouth opened and closed twice before any sound emerged. "You can't prove—" "Can't I?" Marcus pulled his phone out again, this time opening a recording app. "See, the thing about living a lie for 15 years is that you develop certain survival skills, like always being prepared to document important conversations." Bradford's eyes fixed on the phone with laser intensity. "You recorded our conversation upstairs?" "I've been recording everything since yesterday afternoon. Every threat, every racist comment, every casual admission of knowledge you shouldn't possess." Marcus set the phone on the table between them, its screen showing an active recording session. Amazing how much people reveal when they think they're speaking to someone powerless. The door opened with a soft click, and Janet entered carrying a tablet and wearing an expression of grim satisfaction. "The Chronicle's Archives Department was very helpful," she announced, setting the tablet in front of Marcus. "Turns out there was quite a bit more investigation into that car accident than made it into the official reports." Marcus glanced at the screen and felt his pulse spike. Police photographs, witness statements, insurance documents, a paper trail that had been gathering dust for 15 years but had never completely disappeared. "There's more," Janet continued, her eyes never leaving Bradford's increasingly ashen face. "David Reynolds is in the parking lot with his family attorney. Apparently, his father left some very detailed journals before he died. And Detective Patricia Morales from Augusta PD is about 5 minutes out. She reopened the Thompson case last month as part of a cold case initiative." Bradford surged to his feet so violently that his chair toppled backward. "This is insane. You can't seriously believe that anyone will take the word of a lying instructor over—" "Over what?" The new voice came from the doorway, where a middle-aged black woman in a detective's badge stood with a file folder thick as a phone book. "Over physical evidence, witness testimony, financial records showing payments made to a mechanic who disappeared the day after Lightning Thompson's accident?" Detective Morales stepped into the room with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to hostile environments. Her eyes swept the assembled group before settling on Marcus with something that might have been respect. "Mr. Thompson, I presume. We've been looking for you for quite some time." Marcus felt the last of his carefully constructed walls crumble. Not with the sharp pain he'd expected, but with something closer to relief. "Detective, I'm ready to make a statement." "Excellent, because we have several witnesses who've been waiting 17 years to tell their stories, including a mechanic in Macon who's been carrying around some interesting photographs of sabotaged brake lines." Bradford made a sound that was part gasp, part growl. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket, and Marcus tensed, but Bradford only pulled out his phone with shaking fingers. "I'm calling my lawyer," Bradford said, his voice reduced to a hoarse whisper. "Good idea," Detective Morales replied cheerfully. "Call mine too while you're at it. Save us all some time." As Bradford fumbled with his phone, Marcus looked around the room, at Janet's fierce smile, at Whitfield's stunned recognition, at the detective's patient professionalism. For the first time in 15 years, he wasn't facing his demons alone. But even as relief flooded through him, Marcus felt the weight of what was coming. The ordeal was only beginning. Years of legal battles lay ahead, testimony that would reopen wounds, publicity that would strip away the last of his privacy. The scared 17-year-old who'd awakened in that hospital bed was screaming warnings about the danger of hoping too much. Marcus silenced that voice with conscious effort. Lightning Thompson had spent enough years in hiding. It was time to see what justice looked like when you finally stopped running toward it. The first sign that Marcus's moment of triumph was an illusion came when Bradford's lawyer arrived not in 20 minutes, but in 2. Harrison Blackwell III stepped into the conference room like he owned it, which, Marcus realized with growing dread, he probably did. The man wore a $1,000 suit like armor and carried himself with the casual arrogance of someone who had never lost a case that mattered. Behind him walked 2 younger associates and, impossibly, a judge still wearing his robes. "Detective Morales," Blackwell said pleasantly, his voice carrying the authority of generations of legal victories. "I'm afraid there's been a significant development in your investigation." He placed a manila envelope on the table with ceremony. "Judge Harrison has signed an emergency injunction suspending any further questioning of my client, pending a full review of the evidence chain. It seems there are some serious questions about how certain materials were obtained." Detective Morales frowned, reaching for the envelope. As she scanned the documents, Marcus watched her expression shift from confidence to confusion to barely suppressed rage. "How did you even know we were here?" "Shadowbrook has excellent security," Bradford said, his composure returning like water filling a cracked vessel, both digital and human. "Did you really think this ambush would go unnoticed?" Marcus felt the first cold fingers of panic crawling up his spine. "What security? What are you talking about?" Janet answered for him, her voice hollow with recognition. "The phones. They've been monitoring our phones." She held up her device as if it had suddenly grown fangs. "Every call, every text, every plan we made, they knew it all." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Every move they'd made, every ally they'd gathered, every piece of evidence they'd collected, all of it anticipated, countered, neutralized by forces that had been watching and waiting with infinite patience. "The mechanic in Macon," Detective Morales said slowly, her face grim. "Mr. Jackson. When did you last speak with him?" Blackwell's smile widened. "I'm afraid Mr. Jackson has decided that his memory of events from 17 years ago was less reliable than he initially believed. He's recanted his statement and returned the photographs to their rightful owners. Something about wanting to enjoy his retirement in peace." The words struck Marcus like hammer blows. His star witness, his smoking gun, his proof, all evaporating in real time. But worse was coming. He could see it in the satisfied gleam in Bradford's eyes. "There's more," Blackwell continued, pulling out a thick legal document. "It seems Mr. Thompson, has been living under false pretenses for 15 years. Social Security fraud, tax evasion, identity theft. Rather serious federal crimes, I'm afraid." Marcus watched his freedom crumble with each word. The very survival instincts that had kept him alive were now being weaponized against him. Every fake document, every false reference, every carefully constructed lie, all transformed from shields into shackles. "And then there's the matter of his employment here," Blackwell said, turning to Whitfield with mock sympathy. "Falsification of employment records, fraud in the inducement of contract. I'm afraid Shadowbrook's insurance carriers are insisting on immediate termination and full prosecution." Whitfield's face had gone ashen. Marcus saw the man's calculations playing out in real time. Legal liability, insurance claims, the club's reputation, all the goodwill that had accumulated over 5 years of dedicated service evaporated under the harsh light of legal exposure. "Charles," Marcus said desperately, "you know me. You know what kind of man I am." "I thought I did," Whitfield replied, but he couldn't meet Marcus's eyes. "But I don't even know your real name." The knife twisted deeper when Janet stood up abruptly. "I'm sorry, Marcus. The Chronicle can't afford to be associated with this level of legal uncertainty. My editor is pulling the story pending a full legal review." One by one, his allies were being stripped away with surgical precision. Detective Morales was constrained by the injunction. Janet was silenced by legal threats. Whitfield was paralyzed by liability concerns. Marcus found himself alone in a room full of people, isolated as completely as if he were back in that hospital bed 15 years ago. But the final blow came when Bradford leaned forward with predatory satisfaction. "Oh, and Marcus? That student of yours, Tommy Chen, the one you've been so dedicated to mentoring? I'm afraid his family has received some disturbing information about their son's instructor. They're considering filing charges of endangering a minor. The accusation was so vile, so carefully calculated to destroy not just Marcus's freedom but his soul, that he felt something fundamental break inside him. They weren't content to win. They needed to erase every trace of good he'd managed to create from the ashes of Lightning Thompson's dreams. Marcus stared at the faces around the table. Some sympathetic, some calculating, all ultimately powerless against the machine that had been grinding toward this moment for 15 years. He had fought his way back from the brink once before, built a life from nothing, survived when survival seemed impossible. But this time felt different. This time felt final.